In this conversation, we will be focusing on the importance of educating students on the topic of media literacy and critical media literacy skills, and how we can better prepare students to navigate the complex world of misinformation, disinformation, and media manipulation. We'll discuss practical, real-world strategies for teachers and whole school frameworks to help educate students in critical media literacy skills and how to integrate media literacy into the curriculum. We'll also consider how teaching critical thinking skills and source evaluation empowers students to combat falsehoods and explore the role of schools, teachers, and parents in fostering responsible digital citizenship. So thank you everyone for joining this discussion. Really looking forward to it. If we can do a quick round of introductions, that would be great. Rhiann, do you want to go first, please?
Yeah, hello. My name is Rhiann Webb. I'm a professional development expert with Britannica Education, and I've been with the company since January this year. Before that, I was working in academia. I was a university lecturer. So I've made the jump from academia into the commercial realm of digital publishing. And my role really is to identify professional development courses for educators around the globe and build these courses and create them to meet the specific needs of our customers. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rhiann. Mike, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Mike Johnston. I'm the assistant head of school at Frankfurt International School. I've been in international schools for 24 years in different capacities, and this has been an area of both my work and passion for a long time. So I'm really excited to be in the conversation.
Melanie, let's go next.
Hi, my name is Melanie Guidera. I've been working in Dubai since 2005. I came over to work at a school to head up the first GCSE and A-level media and film studies courses in the UAE. I currently work at JESS Dubai, which is a not-for-profit organisation, and we have 3 schools. We've got 2 primaries and 1 secondary. I work in secondary. I've been teaching English for the last 9 years, so I kind of ventured back into my degree subject. But this year I've started an international BTEC at level 3 on creative media.
Wonderful. Thanks, Melanie. And John.
Hi, my name is John Micton. I'm the Primary Technology for Learning Coordinator at the International School of Geneva. And in addition, I'm a trainer and course designer at the Principal Training Center. And I've spent quite a few years in education media technology, having worked in schools across Africa, Asia, and Europe as an IT director, deputy principal, and director of e-learning. And it's a real privilege to be here on this, what I find such a timely conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great to have everyone on the call. Yeah, so John, you're going to kick us off with the first question, which is, it has been said that we're currently experiencing an infodemic. So why is it crucial for students and young learners to become media literate? And what implications does this infodemic we're experiencing have for media literacy education?
Okay, I'm going to maybe break this up into 3 little sections because there's a lot there. The infodemic is kind of the idea that we all experience is this glut of information and really fueled by algorithms. So a lot of this information is actually curated and choreographed by these algorithms, pending our behaviors and how we interact in social media platforms and our habits online. So we get a very curated experience, and we get a lot of it in different contexts, be it social media, on your television, on your phone. And this idea of all this information coming in and really never knowing how accurate it is, or it tends to be very much one narrative, the narrative that the algorithms feel I want to read and I want to engage with, and then I miss out on this whole other narrative. So, you know, KnowledgeWorks calls this these toxic narratives. In other words, what we perceive as being true for one stakeholder group would be very different for another. And this just really complicates the media landscape, especially when you're in a school setting and you have children and young adolescents trying to come to terms with that. And I think also nowadays for teachers themselves, many of us have been educated in the time of initial search engines, and we're really not that versed, or maybe don't have as many toolkits available or that we're comfortable with to really navigate this idea of these toxic narratives, of fake news, or this information that we're really not clear on where to double check on it. the big issue, and you can already see in the context today, where a percentage of news that comes into our feed actually is not real news. And you hear news organizations talking about how they triangulate and verify information that we're seeing on the news feeds. But the fact is, sometimes they could be as mundane as gaming videos that are then sent out to represent events that are happening that actually are not connected to the gaming video. And so you've got this fake news. You've also got perspectives that often there's no fact checking. It's emotion. It's very much a gut reaction, and people kind of supporting each other. The bottom line is, for any educational institution, because what we want is our students to be critical thinkers, problem solvers, really be perceptive, really understand the importance of balanced perspectives and how to really check that things are true. So when you're amplifying or sharing out, you're really giving a very level-headed, well-founded, fact-checked piece of information. And as this becomes more difficult, it actually impacts democratic processes, because now opinions are so separated and so toxic that actually people jump to one perspective, and there's really not much consensus. There's this gap in between what you think is right and what the other person thinks right, and there are these bridges that are really lacking, where people can really find an opportunity to be tolerant and open to these perceptions and and really digest that and then come to consensus on what actually is happening. So I think it has never been more important for schools to engage with it. And I think we struggle because we haven't really invested in the professional development for people to understand, how do algorithms work? How do news work? How can we engage and kind of fight against this personalized experience? How can we bring a broad perspective? What are the resources we can do? And that takes time. And if we don't give the time, then what happens is teachers are kind of falling prey to this kind of what I would say toxic narrative, and then kids see that as a model, and then they engage with it and only amplify it more. So I can't think of a more important topic today, if we believe in democratic values and voice for all kinds of marginalized groups and non-marginalized groups, that we're equal players in the narratives that we build about what's going around us, then media literacy should be a non-negotiable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, John. And I think that's a massive part of civics education, and how the democratic principles are, really put into practice in the classroom. And I think that is an important thing to bear in mind, is that when we're talking about literacy, we're also talking about why is literacy important? Okay, so to read, to write, numerical literacies, there's so many different types of literacies. And teachers, will be doing that as part of their teaching practice, as part of the curriculum. But the thing is that media literacy, as far as I know, isn't a specific subject. We have media studies, and Mel will talk about that soon, I'm sure. But John, as far as you know, how does civics education, how does that actually correspond with what's going on in classrooms, say, for example, in your school? Do you call it civics education, or how does media literacy actually get taught in the school where you work?
I think often, media literacy, kind of on the philosophical and ethical level, it's through a theory of knowledge. If you're in an IB school, that's a big component. You have that philosophy and that questioning. I think there's a lot of research, a lot of units of inquiry. We're an IB school, so a lot of units of inquiry require research. But people, and this is no disrespect to anybody, kind of bumble along. They go to Google, they might go to some library sites, but we're not really getting kids to look at a feed from TikTok or Twitter or wherever, and unpacking that and saying, look, this is wrong. How do we know this is wrong? What are we doing to really leverage that understanding? And how are we equipping teachers to know that, yes, the TikTok feed actually is where a big percentage of the kids might be getting their news. It might be Instagram, it might be whatever social media platform. So I really think it's almost like revisiting what we think as media literacy literacy and understanding, it's exploded, and it comes at any time, anywhere, and kids are constantly getting updates. We all are. So navigating that, I think, you know, what we're seeing is schools are starting to understand that, but I think there's no real clear framework that people are working with, and a lot of people are creating some really engaging lessons. But I don't think, you know, there's a framework that we can just pull off the shelf and engage with it, because it's changing so fast. And there are different organizations, media literacy organizations, etc., ISTE and DQ. There are a lot of organizations that provide the platform, but a lot of it has to do with where do teachers have the time to make that a focus, because they're competing a lot of other things, math, reading, they're just all kinds of other things. But I think if we believe in these democratic processes of critical thinking, problem solving, and agency for multiple voices with solid perspectives, then we need to give it much more airspace than we're allowed to.
Melanie, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on sort of the importance of young learners and students becoming media literate.
Well, I just found what John was saying, it was so interesting, and it was right along some of the lines that I was thinking. For me, it kind of came back to what's happening in the classroom with students producing media. So we don't just have consumers now, we have consumer creators. So I was talking to my BTEC class about this the other day, and they're 25 years ago when I started teaching, it was much more of a consumer kind of media literacy, whereas now you've got the students producing media. And I think it's often been quite an easy win in the classroom, or let's make a little film about, let's do a sound recording on this, let's make an advert. And I think where that is an easy win, and I'll come back to that sort of later on, what doesn't always happen is there isn't always the connection between the recognition of the impact as a media product, rather than kind of just trying to cover curriculum. So I think it's very easy to convince students that something, particularly these days, is real. I think about a boy in my tutor group, he's in year 9, so he's about 13, and he wants to be a footballer. And I think he believes that this is going to be easier for him now than it ever was, because of social media, it brings those personalities, those sports personalities, so much closer. And so he we never want to squash anybody's dreams, but I think he believes it even more than ever. He also, like a lot of them are, they're kind of very taken in by what are essentially all the get rich quick schemes and scams that we've all had to kind of navigate. But again, because it's so close, and social media can make it look so realistic and so kind of easy to get. It's never been more prevalent. So I think just recognizing the impact of the media that students are looking at and making, it's absolutely vital for them. And of course, that critical thinking in media literacy is really what we should be aiming for as well. So, this was something that I was thinking about, where does this fall in the curriculum? And it's traditionally fell to ICT, or computer science, as we call it here now, particularly at Key Stage 3. It's coming through increasingly in English, and having been an English teacher for quite a long time now, or gone back into teaching English, I've found in the IB diploma program that the Langlit course, it's one of the integral parts of it is image analysis. So, that is covered in other parts of the IB diploma program, other than the film course that is also part of the IB. There are also kind of the media and film programs that are specific, but they're still kind of sort of a bit few and far between. And the research suggests that there's still kind of this very little understanding, and there is this gap between the learning that you do of the media, or about the media in school, and its consumption and creation. It's kind of 50% less time. So it's a big thing.
Yeah, Mike, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on the importance of media literacy.
There's a lot in there of what's been discussed so far. I would say I would echo the fact that the media creation is the key, because if we're creating media, then it comes back to, it always comes back to assessment, right? And what we're actually assessing and what we're looking for students to do. And it makes me wonder, if you look way back, we've always been asking, when, as John, you were mentioning, when somebody says something, right? We've always, throughout history, responded with, well, what makes you say that? You know, what evidence do you have to say? That hasn't changed. It's just we're bombarded with so much more. And I find that engaging students in the way the world works for the algorithms really intrigues them. Get them in the conversation about it. A good example is, you know, if you're studying marketing and you're looking at the ideas of perceived obsolescence and planned obsolescence, when students learn about that, to say, wait, I'm getting played here by, you know, companies that are making products to break after a certain time, so I have to buy another, or they're making things that they're going to change the fashion on me, and that's going to be changed shortly, so then I have to buy a flat or a heel or whatever it might be. They love that. It's super engaging provocation. So why not do that with the media literacies? You know, in the end of the day, why do we always have to be producing these products that are products of our era, when you don't have to be on TikTok to produce a TikTok as an assessment to understand what that's doing? Again, that comes back to the teachers feeling comfortable to do so and recognizing that they are a co-learner. I mean, we could spend a long time around the conversation of pedagogy of what that looks like, but I mean, it's fodder for learning. It's sensational.
Great, Mike. And when would you say that the way in is through inquiry-based instruction or inquiry-based learning, to be able to, you know, inquire and develop that critical kind of mindset? Is that how you do that in your school?
It depends. It can be. It depends on the context and the age for the students. I mean, the inquiry spectrum is so large that sometimes the provocation just needs to get them into the conversation to realize how interesting the conversation is. And sometimes you have students who are ready to dig deeply. And so it depends. But yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to do it. And in the end of the day, you can structure your assessments around looking at the media literacies. But unless people know that that's important to do or how to do it, which I think we'll talk about probably later in this conversation, it's a bit of a non-starter.
Thanks, Mike. Moving on to my second question. So, as media literacy is not usually taught as an academic subject at secondary school level, who typically takes ownership for teaching media literacy, and how can media literacy education be incorporated into the school's curriculum more broadly? Melanie, it'd be great for you to kick off that question for us.
Okay, I think I kind of covered a bit of that earlier as well. As I said, it traditionally comes to, I think we expect IT or ICT or computer science, however you refer to it in the school, to start that ball rolling. But I think increasingly this is something that we do in English. And I know, you know, aside from specific media and film programs that should be covering media literacy, and certainly we'll be talking about media vocabulary, and essentially media analysis and critical thinking about media products. In English, I know that at JESS we certainly do incorporate kind of critical thinking about websites, media products like films, television programs. Of course, we need to do it for persuasive writing. So we look at persuasive journalism as well. Very specifically, we've got kind of schemes of work from year 7 through to year 9. And it has actually been quite an interesting process over the last couple of years, because when we're thinking about, like Mike was saying, thinking about teachers trying to incorporate these things into their work, certain teachers feel more confident to do that than others. So those teachers, you know, working with the teachers who are a bit less confident, I think it's a really important thing to recognise that this is not something that comes easily to all teachers. We are quite happy consumers, but not always the best creators of it, or kind of develop that much of an understanding, or in fact put that much importance, you know, that much store by it. So aside from English teaching and media teaching, at my school we have a bespoke program which is tied to our moral, social and cultural education that we have to run in Dubai, and all schools have to run MSc, and we call it the Think Tank. It is a bespoke program that I created with a colleague of mine, and it was something that was a passion project, just to try and make sure that our students had some education in issues that happen around the world that we don't normally cover in our curriculum. So because MSc and kind of social studies needed to be covered in our curriculum, PSHE kind of evaporated, but the think tank is still there. And we cover you know, year 7 through to year 13, and we cover everything from animal cruelty to political bias, but we do include media literacy topics such as media bias, body image in the media, and e-safety as well. So even though there is, I believe there's a lot of scope to cover it in lots of different subjects, we do actually have part of that as a bespoke program at our school, because we do think it's really important.
And how much time do you devote to that? I mean, how has that come about, the amount of contact time with learners? Very short. They're for our tutors, and it's covered in a tutor time at least once a week. So some tutors, you know, they will extend it across a couple of tutor times. It's short. We do link it in with some of our MSc objectives, though, that need to be covered, and there are specific objectives in moral, social and cultural education that do mention media literacy and the notion that students do need to know what's good and what's bad coming at them from the internet.
Excellent. Thanks, Melanie. John, Mike, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on who typically takes ownership for teaching media literacy.
Do you mind if I jump in first, John?
No, not at all.
I just want to say this is, I mean, it happens in educations and cycles like this. Integration of this into all of the learning is the key. So in order to get there, it's not an isolated thing. It's happening in everybody's lives everywhere. The challenge in education to make these kinds of things a priority is we have so many competing priorities. So in the end of the day, I find that the hardest thing is not to get the resources. We have the resources. We know what to do. We know what we can do. We could get PD. We could focus on this. The hardest thing is to make the to-don't list. What are we going to stop doing to make time to do the things that are most topical and most important right now in this ever-changing complex world? So I find that to be honestly the biggest challenge. So if we wanted to really do this, because you know, it's not typically in any particular academic area, but should be across as this prevalent skills to be learned, and the ethics and the values and everything that comes with it, what can we give up to do so?
Yeah, do you have to give up anything, or is there a part there with the integration of those kind of skills into the lessons, or more of an alignment? I mean, the curriculum that's at your school is the IB, is that right, Mike? It's
a mix. We have IB diploma, PYP, and then bespoke from 6 to 10.
So is that possible then? Do you think it is actually something that can be done at an academic level with the school studies? So rather than giving something up, you can try to, you know, integrate more of that skills development into the subject, whichever that subject is.
Oh, I always think it's a yes and.
Yeah.
So it comes back to priorities. So it comes back to what you're willing to prioritize in order to, for example, upskill the educators to do so. But there's lots of things that we want to grab for the time for professional learning and otherwise to say, no, this is more important. So what's going to make it a priority? And when you make these priorities, something's going to go down the list on the priorities. So that's what I mean. So what are you going to push down the list? And let's face it, when it comes to a lot of the content that a lot of schools are still teaching and learning, and some antiquated assessment practices, I'd knock that kind of stuff off the list to prioritize this.
One thing that we've been using is we're in the PYP and in the MYP is the program of inquiry, because if you look at I'm just going to read some of the topics: how the world works, what we are in place and time, how we express ourselves. These are things that are quite old, but when you think of today, how you express yourself and how the world works, then there's so many great opportunities to bring in that media literacy. So for example, the kids are doing a whole thing on social activism. So we did lessons on hashtags. How do hashtags work? We've been doing a thing on digital tracking. How does digital tracking work? How do tracking cookies and regular cookies, how do they differ? How come is when your mom and dad are talking about a Thai restaurant next time on your phone? And we talked about user agreements and all those things. And I think it's just a matter of looking what you have and saying, listen, let's just not modernize, let's make it current. What are some current provocations and entry points that can really allow us to amplify this? And the kids absolutely, like Mike was saying, they absolutely love this because it's their world. They do have anecdotes. Yes, my mom talked about Indonesian food. We only have Indonesian ads. My sister bought some red shoes. And suddenly they're starting to make those connections, and they're seeing the importance, especially with digital tracking. I know a lot of the year sixes, when they engage with the whole lesson, we did a few lessons on digital tracking, hashtags, and algorithms. They were like, well, why do they get to do this? That's a great question. Let's find out, So I think it's also looking at what you have and being courageous and saying, well, we don't need to throw it out, but let's look at it through a different lens. Let's look at it through the eyes of the students, because I think so often we teach to the past. We say, okay, this is my reference point. Let's do a persuasive essay and let's stand up in a crowd. Nobody's doing that. You put 140 characters on Twitter and X and you hope it goes. I think that's where we need to start shifting, is that not always thinking about our teachers' past, where we're comfortable, being uncomfortable in engaging with where they are.
Yeah, and that's quite a big thing to be able to chew off, I can imagine, because the teacher would need to do their own research or inform themselves either through reading or watching something or receiving some training on that, I would imagine. Or is that not the case? Do you think the learners are also co-contributing the kind of knowledges and experiences, and then between the teachers and the learners, they're actually beginning to form their own understanding of what's going on, especially the technical side of things?
I think a bit of both. And I think it's also, I always, when I'm working with teachers and they're like, well, why would we, I don't know much about hashtags. Doesn't matter. But good questions, and to ask those good questions, and you know how to curate and ensure that the kids are asking good questions, and there's that dialogue and you're moving it forward. You can go and get a YouTube video to explain hashtags in 5 minutes. So I think it's also making sure teachers don't feel disenfranchised and saying, no, you still have a critical role in this conversation. You bring so much wisdom and expertise. Okay, the knowledge part, well, guess what? We have YouTube, we have ChatGPT. We can generate the knowledge very quickly for you to use it as a point of reference, but what a good lesson looks like. What good inquiry looks like. And I think it's really making sure teachers know they have an immense amount of expertise and value. And what can you do as a team? Okay, we'll go and quickly find out what these things are. We'll watch a couple of videos. And in some schools, we have, and like my role where I'm a digital coach, a lot of schools have people working with teachers to support them, the library teams and the digital coaches, and really, making sure that's a co-teaching environment where teachers feel respected and really eager to learn, because things are set up in a way that it gives them also some choice and agency.
I think that's a really interesting point that you're bringing up there with kind of teacher concern about what they can what they can bring to those lessons. And we recently had some inset about some research that John Hattie has done. He's still at it, but it turns out that kind of one of the biggest barriers to learning is the teacher's own concerns about what they can manage and do. And I found myself really relating to this, because having been back into English, being the person who knows about tech in English and putting together kind of media style resources for English, going back in to teach at the highest level that we can have in school, in a very practical course, I found myself really worrying about, really questioning my kind of technical skills nearly 10 years on from the last time that I taught media and film. So, I've kind of thrown myself back into it, but there is so much more information out there that has helped me to kind of redevelop and relearn skills and learn new skills. And, it's, I think for teachers, one of the key things is just to be really open-minded about it as well. And, I'm not very good at, I always want to make everything just right. And I think it is a real kind of product of my environment. So I think we have to accept that it's not always going to be perfect. Definitely.
Yeah.
Max, can I share an example?
Of course, Mike. Yeah.
Because that really resonates, because here at FIS, at Frankfurt International School, we ran two PD days 2 weeks ago, and you may have seen some things floating around social media about it. But what was interesting is it was focused on artificial intelligence, global citizenship, and belonging. And in the end of the day, so much of it was about these literacies and understanding your world and jumping into the technology, but with purpose to create a better world. And when we constructed the learning in a way that we had inputs from some external experts, and we shared knowledge between each other, but then we did a design sprint. And what I'm finding, particularly Melanie, at first there was some hesitation of, wait, can I do something else on the Friday? Because I don't actually understand what that's going to look like. But I have this other thing that I have to do. And we held, preserved. And 370 colleagues, teachers, non-teachers, everybody was in the design sprint. And you should see the 82 design teams in what they were creating. And it's because they were given freedom to say, just try it. And especially when it comes to artificial intelligence, and I would say I'd draw the parallel to these media literacies, just create a place to play in order to just give it a go, so that they don't get the I have to be the sage on the stage kind of feeling, and I can't dig into this until I completely understand it. And the impact on our organization has been tremendous for people to just try it, because we gave them free license to give it a go.
Yeah. And I think, Mike, that's the whole agency part is, it's not that I was there, but you created a framework and then those design teams, but within there was like, you do however you want to do it. We're not going to tell you. So there was a loose structure, and there was, of course, there was no opt out. But when you opted in, then there was a lot of space for you and your group of people to say, let's try that. And I mean, if you think inquiry is basically about playing, right? It's exploring. If you look at Reggio, some of the philosophies is, how are we engaging in play-based learning where it's a safe place? Actually, somebody said we shouldn't be saying safe places. We should say brave places. Mm-hmm. Because when you say safe, it's very dormant. You're safe and you don't do anything. Brave place means you have to action something to demonstrate bravery. And I like that idea. And this is fantastic. Your anecdote, that is very powerful.
I agree.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I love the idea of the curiosity behind it. And there is this sense that you don't want to fail, but actually, if I think about my career, well, all of my career, I think there's been a lot of kind of safe failure. When I came over to Dubai, there were no other media studies teachers. I was faced with a lot of technology I'd never seen before, never laid my hands to. And I just kind of spent a lot of time pressing buttons. What does this do? Oh, have I broken? No, I haven't broken it. You know, so I think I think we lose our sense of that the longer we're able to do something really successfully. So we keep doing the same thing and the same thing and the same thing. And then AI hits us and we're all, you know, devastated and scared to death of the impact of it. But actually, it's so much fun to play with. But you're absolutely right, that inquiry and play, I think it's very important, definitely.
I'd love to dig
What's
into
interesting, Mike, is that when you said that, you said 370 people. You didn't say there was a group of facilitators in one section, and it was everybody. It was a level playing field. So I imagine yourself and your other leadership team members were in the design team. So everybody's kind of flat. You know, there's no hierarchy. Everybody is an equal. So if you mess up in front of somebody else, it doesn't matter. And I think that's what's really nice, the way you framed that.
Watching the last 45 minutes of them sharing what they had been working on in the gymnasium was magic.
Awesome.
What kind of things were they designing?
Oh, everything from assessments to unit plans to better security protocols to, yeah, it was everything from saving time, becoming more effective and efficient to embedding the sustainable development goals for true inquiry in that inquiry unit in grade 4. I mean, it was all over the place, but it's going to impact learning for kids.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Mike. And digging into these sort of practical strategies that each of you have sort of mentioned, I'd like to sort of uncover those a bit more in a bit more depth. What are some of these practical strategies, interventions, current best practices that staff members and teachers can implement to develop pupils' media literacy skills? Obviously, ones that maybe you've tried in your school, but perhaps other best practices that you've sort of come across from different schools around the world. Yeah, Mike, it'd be great for you to kick off that question.
Sure. So I started that already. So I'll keep this short in terms of practical strategies because I want to hear from everybody else as well. Let me start with a micro example. So a practical strategy of creating assessments that actually gauge media literacy. So it sounds like a simple thing, but it's quite transformational when you have teaching and learning teams creating assessments, and you can ask the very simple question to say, how would you measure these literacies? Now, you might need to take a step back and say, what are these literacies? Right? And as I said, we have the resources for that kind of thing, but most of the time people look at these media literacies and say, oh yeah, I do that. That's what I do. And so a very practical strategy would be to take the step to say, well, how could we assess it? How would we know that students are actually engaging that and getting better at actually deciphering the fake news from, you know, what's actually fact-based and that kind of thing. And so when you actually have to create the assessment, and you can do it in teams to actually look at those practicalities, they're not only learning themselves, but then they're actually, the next step, as we talked about earlier in this conversation, much more likely to integrate it into their academic subject areas and inquiries. So it's kind of a win-win-win from a micro practicality. Let me get even more micro. Yeah, I learned from a great educator. This was during an advisory, and you can call it tutor, homeroom, whatever culturally people call that block of time where that adult is like mom or dad to them and kind of looking at their overall experience. I saw a master educator who every 6 months, they have a super fun activity where their advisor group creates tutorials for adults. And the way the teacher frames it is they say, hey, listen, I'm not living in your world. I don't really understand Snapchat. And so I want you to help me understand if you were going to make Snapchat for dummies, right? I need you to make it for me, because I need to understand. And then they actually share that with the parents as well. And it is phenomenal a way to funnel into the conversation of the types of media, social media, and other things that kids are actually using. And then what it does is gets them into that level conversation. And again, back to that co-learner style of, hey, listen, nobody can keep up by drinking from this fire hose that's coming at us. So let's learn this together. And this teacher actually modeled an example from their childhood, which was sensational. All the kids looked at it and went, I don't even know what that is. Right? Here's my space. And they're like, what? And it's just created this relationship and this open dialogue. So there's all kinds of micro examples like that. And so eventually, ideally, everything from source evaluation to media analysis and that kind of thing starts to become more practical in your school and more integrated in what you're doing. And on a larger, if I go macro, it's about systems and structure. Because if you really want to do this well in your school, you have to make sure that this is somebody's job. Because if it's not somebody's job, if it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job. And everybody looks at this and says, yeah, it's important. Well, who's ensuring that that's the case? And so actually a macro practical example for us as a school is we have our candidates arriving this week for our Director of IT Innovation, Teaching and Learning. And that's in their portfolio. And that we created a team of team structure where we have IT operations and we have IT innovation, teaching and learning, and we're not going to let it fall through the cracks. And so those teams of teams, that's their responsibility to create a strategy, because you can have all the resources in the world, but really in the end of the day, if you don't have a strategy to do it, it's not going to happen. So a little bit of micro to macro.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mike. Melanie, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on any practical and intervention, best practices, etc.
Well, it's like I was saying, having getting students to use media products to show their learning is a pretty easy win. It's a fun win, and it's easier than it ever was now. But every single time that there is an opportunity for at least some media language, at least looking at a product that already exists, maybe doing a little bit of analysis, whether it is to do with color or shape or the message that's coming through. It doesn't have to take long, but it's just a little bit. So, you know, that could be all the way down with really young children in primary, the way that they see things and the way that they understand the messages. If we're thinking about kind of the other end, thinking about my year 13s in the diploma program, the examiners' reports have come back for the oral examinations, and it seems that the examiners really like it if a student is comparing their literary work with something that is non-literary and a visual. So you know, students have to talk about global issues. They choose their global issue that they're going to talk about. This year, I've got students putting Frankenstein up against Mary Poppins and characters who are powerful and powerless. You know, we might be looking at Carol Ann Duffy's poetry and comparing her work to Lisa Donnelly's cartoons. You know, so and looking at kind of gender representation, and there are a lot of other things that they, you know, that they can talk about. So we are looking at you know, visual learning and visual texts at, you know, at both ends of the school. And so, you know, I think in between, we have to make sure that we are building in that kind of the literacy of the critical thinking and the understanding of what's actually happening in the image or the piece of film or the sound recording or, you know, or the advertising, I think, or the game. We have to teach them how to understand because it comes back at the end of for us, it comes back to the exam system, yes, but, you know, the exam system is getting them to talk about global issues because global issues are so important. So.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. John, it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think one thing that we want kids is when they go through any learning experience that they make some connections, and those connections are things that they feel that it's pertinent, it's purposeful and authentic. And one way, often digital citizenship is a tough one, you know, kids kind of roll their eyes. But one thing that I've done in different contexts is that you get a group of kids to design digital citizenship lessons and then take them down to a different grade and actually deliver them. And during COVID, we started this because a lot of kids were complaining how their online lessons weren't very interesting. So we challenged them to make digital citizenship lessons in Zoom. And we had 43 kids show 43 other kids in year 3 what a digital citizenship lessons, and they logged in and everything. So I think when kids can construct their understanding, and there's nothing more powerful than watching you tell a kid something and then you say, okay, now go and teach it. There is nothing more powerful in assessing a child's understanding based on how they deliver a lesson to a peer. And especially if it's a younger peer, because then there's some really interesting dynamics between the kind of, the older child and also trying to translate their understanding into something that's bite-sized that younger kids talk. And then you're starting to have all kinds of conversations about communication, message, perception. You're using the tools. Is your slide really busy? Maybe you just want one title and a picture and you'll do the talking. So we do a lot on presentations then. So I think whenever you can make those authentic, purposeful connections for the kids, and they can deliver not just in front of their peers, which every kid does constantly in a 12-year experience, but actually physically walk down to another building and deliver it. Or in Mike's case, they were talking about delivering it to the parents or even doing it to older kids. I think suddenly the kids actually see much more purpose and they're much more invested in it. And they get quite stressed. They're like, well, my lesson's not yet finished. So it's just nice to do that. And I think wherever we can make those connections and give opportunities for kids to walk out of their physical space and deliver understanding in a different context and have that human interaction, you're going to get much more. And nowadays, anything that you present requires media literacy. You can't open a Google slide deck without engaging in some media literacy or taking a picture from the internet or whatever, or a piece of music. All those conversations become part of the learning.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, do you think there's a flip side to that? And it reminds me a little bit of the discovery learning stages, the idea of sparking curiosity and then going through the different stages of discovery learning. And then in a way, it sounds like those learners are thinking about what it's like to be a teacher, or at least to teach something. So it's kind of like a discovery teaching as well. So they get very, involved in that process. And I can imagine the amount of learning that takes place, not just because they're discovering something for themselves, but then they're actually figuring out how to communicate that to others. And also, where does the discussion come? At the end of all of that, the sorts of debates that come about in the classroom, I can imagine it's really very, very engaging. But do you think some areas of the media landscape where teachers just would not touch, they just wouldn't go there? They wouldn't want to go there because it's very controversial kind of issues, or there are certain things that they're not too sure about. For example, disinformation and misinformation, how to tell the difference, what kind of sources would the teachers use, and then what would they encourage their learners to use, and how to evaluate those sources. Because within all of that discovery, there are sources of information, and it's also been able to have that critical mindset. And as Mel has been talking about, those kind of frameworks for media literacy frameworks like bias, prejudice, anything to do with gender, anything to do with color, anything to do with race, anything to do with, it could be any kind of representation. But what would you say would be the area where teachers might need a bit more encouragement, where they may not feel that confident about, looking at different controversial issues that learners might want to bring into the classroom? And then how do they evaluate those sources of information?
I think one thing is, you have to think, what age group are you working with? What's appropriate with different age groups? So that's immediately the filter that you're going to work with. There are a lot of organizations. MIT has a whole curriculum on fake news for adolescents, 11 to 15. It's just, and they have this whole research arm of graduate and doctoral students that can generate really rich content. Stanford, they're just, I think, for teachers, it's maybe just somebody pointing them in those directions, giving them time. And I think, as Mike said, you know, who's making people accountable for this? I think if you don't have, you know, if you just expect a team to come up with this, there needs to be some accountability somewhere where you actually have to do it. I think it's also professional development. You know, I've been doing some research about fake news and fake images. And one thing I start learning is that hands are really hard to replicate. So if you don't see fingers and detailed nails, chances are that it's a fake image. There are certain things that is much harder to do well. And most fake news images are cheap replicas that are maybe photoshopped or with some AI. Of course, that's going to change. But so those are the kind of things where actually maybe you do need some professional development. I think it's a combination of, you know, what accountabilities you put in, what kind of professional development, and also allowing teachers, and you know, Mike's anecdote of having the design sprints when they're sitting down and looking at their programs of inquiry, that they're actually having the time and having those discussions. Because if you put teachers in a room and let them really unpack a program of inquiry, in the case of the PYP, it's amazing what percolates up. And I think we sometimes underestimate. It's just that we don't ever give enough time to sit down, you know, for a whole morning or whole afternoon for people to have that time, and not uninterrupted time. So I think it's a combination of these different things.
Brilliant.
If I can just jump in as a kind of ordinary classroom teacher most of the time, I think having SLT support with projects, like I was saying about our think tank project, there are topics that we can't cover in the UAE. We just can't. But there were topics that when we took our idea to our head, who asked one of our deputy heads to oversee it with us, and some of the things we suggested we thought were, you know, quite controversial, and as it turned out, she was able to kind of tell us, you know, how far we could go in school and what we needed to address, because we had topics that we thought that were kind of controversial that didn't even scratch the surface, and we were quite shocked at the things that she said that we really ought to start kind of looking at and considering, because I think, and I think this is, you know, this isn't just a Dubai thing at all. So we needed to have some support. We also have been given time to develop the program. Not enough time, but there's never enough time, is there? But we got given half days or a day to go out and sit down and say, right, what do we need to touch upon to kind of make sure our students are informed about things that are happening in the world that we wouldn't normally talk about in the classroom, including the media literacy stuff, but lots of other things as well. And, you know, like you said, accountability, we know that we're accountable, but we also have we have a lot of support, and we now have a lot of support all across the school. So, you know, that has worked out really, really well. And that support's very, very important. Yeah,
and just sort of digging into this, into, you know, moving into our final question now, digging into the professional development side of things. Rianne's going to lead us on this question, so it'd be great to hear everyone's thoughts as well. What is meant by the term critical media literacy, and how can schools support teachers with professional development opportunities so they're able to effectively and confidently teach critical media literacy? Rianne, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I started researching critical media literacy about 4 months ago, and I started to look at what is critical media literacy. And really, there is no one solid definition that's used globally around the world. But I think to try to just answer the question that you asked, it seems to be about evaluating. It's about analyzing sources of information, being able to evaluate information. So whatever that might be, it might be information coming from news, you know, broadcasters, or it might be information coming via TikTok video, but it's the ability, I think, to analytically break down the different components and the representations in various different medium and been able to particularly understand, or at least try to get some sort of idea about what is this thing and what is it actually, what is the message, who has created this, why is it being created, where's it coming from, those sorts of questions, which really lends itself very well to anything to do with inquiry-based education. So many teachers, you know, who may be watching this might be saying, okay, what's the critical side of media literacy? And I think really the critical side of media literacy is being able to instill that starting point for yourselves as teachers, but also for your learners, is to think about the questions. What sorts of questions could I ask? What sort of questions am I interested in? Why should I ask these questions? Why are they important? So around the critical media literacies, which some people also refer to as digital media literacy, but there are two frameworks that are particularly useful. And those ones are the kind of, you know, things that I've put into the course, because I think it's very important to be able to have those frameworks for teachers to look at, and also potentially to show their learners, so that they have some kind of idea of where to start and how to sort of build on that knowledge and understanding. And through doing that, they can then start to develop their critical thinking skills. So anybody, I think, is interested in the critical side of things, really it's just to do with critical thinking. So that, I would say in a nutshell, is the critical media literacy side of things. In terms of professional development, well, I find that really interesting, because I mean, I'm a big advocate for professional development. I've learned a lot, and I've really come, like leaps and bounds in my own career, just through just my own inquisitiveness about various different things to do with education. So yeah, I'm saying really in a way that for people who aren't too sure about media literacy and whether it's important for them or something significant, I think that even just a slight sense of curiosity about the sorts of things that have been brought up today in this webinar could actually take you on your own journey, just to sort of dip your toe in and have a look and see what kind of things are important. Why would they be important to you as a teacher? So I think that it's really something that is quite, it's quite current, in the sense that more and more information is coming through into the classroom. And from my research, I could see that there were two very important reports that came through from the RAND Corporation, and they were doing educational research studies into teachers who are teaching media literacy of some kind in public schools in America. And quite a lot of what we've talked about today, in fact, with Mike and Mel and John, that just came through in these two studies. So I just wanted to highlight some of the important aspects there that are linked to professional development. And I think the first one, the study was called Media Use and Literacy in Schools. And this was published in 2020. And what it was saying was that across all the grade levels for elementary and also for secondary, the most commonly reported challenge was that students have made unfounded claims in class. So they're based on unreliable media sources. And then that was closely followed by students shared hateful posts on social media. So it also represents that whatever a teacher's doing, whether they're teaching a subject, whether it's maths, it's science, whatever sources are being used in class, there's always a possibility, a potential that other sources that, not necessarily used in the classroom, the teachers trying to, ask the learners to use that, they might be using their mobile phones or whatever, or they might have seen something somewhere and then they've remembered it and they haven't necessarily gone through the process of learning how to evaluate what it is that they're hearing or seeing or reading. So I think that's a very important part of media literacy, and why it's so important as well for teachers to be able to be given the space and the time to explore what that means for them when they're teaching their subjects. Because this was definitely something that came up in the report as well, was that roughly 9 in 10 secondary teachers indicated that inability to evaluate the credibility of online information was a problem, with 4 in 10 rating it as a major problem. So I think that's really quite significant. When we're talking about media literacy and why it should be prioritized. You know, we're talking about when should this become a priority if it isn't already a priority in your school. But it's also about promoting media literacy education in the schools. So one of the other reports, also from the RAND Corporation, they talked about the different approaches and obstacles to promoting media literacy in these schools in America. And really what they're saying is that this is a precursor to professional development, and prioritizing professional development for media literacy or critical media literacy skills. But really what's needed is a systematic evidence regarding how schools and teachers promote media literacy education and what obstacles they're facing. So this would help the school leaders and policymakers and others who are involved in education to identify which areas are of the greatest need. So I would say that you know, is also a big part of where do teachers start to focus their own professional development initiatives, whether this is actually coming from school leaders or whether this is something individual, or if it's a mix between the two. You know, perhaps that's, you know, another way of doing professional development. But yeah, the main obstacles, I think, you know, facing media literacy education, as is reported to be in this study, is that school leadership is not really valuing or placing enough emphasis on media literacy. Why that is, I don't know. I could maybe ask the panel members who might be able to answer that question. But certainly there seems to be a lack of training and professional development in media literacy. That this is coming from the States, but from my own research in Europe and other parts of the world, this definitely seems to be the case as well. And also interestingly, teachers were reporting there's a lack of media literacy instructional resources. So how to use the educational resources, but in a more instructional manner. And then also a lack of expert guidance on implementing media literacy programs or curriculum. So there's quite a number of obstacles there, I think. And that's perhaps where the professional development would be really, really important for teachers and for school leaders who are interested in trying to explore how do we prioritize media literacy education? How do we then, you know, make sure that that's aligned with what we're trying to achieve here in our school with our curriculum or the values of the school? So yeah, I was just wondering if there were any thoughts there from Mel or from Mike or from John about some of those obstacles and whether they've experienced that themselves in their schools.
It's interesting that you're talking about school leadership. I emailed my head teacher to say that I was doing this, and I said, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to kind of add to this? And we have a new head who is he's kind of very keen to support media and media literacy in school. What he felt was that, you know, he felt that there does need to be more kind of consistent standpoint on it, and wants there to be more training. So, you know, I see that as a real bonus, actually. But yeah, I can kind of see how that works. And we recently had some AI training, and I was with the heads of department talking about it, and I think it's just trying to kind of get past the worries of student usage for kind of the wrong usage, and just trying to kind of make it something that we have to embrace. And it was a really interesting discussion with heads of department, because I guess about half of the people who were in the room were really kind of keen to talk about it and use it and had ideas about it. And there were quite a lot of people in there who are quite resistant. And it's, you know, totally understandable, but it isn't something that's going to go away. So, you know, what you're saying about senior leadership needing to kind of offer more kind of training opportunities. I think, again, though, coming back to what Mike was saying earlier, it's about what do you prioritize, when do you do it, how do you find the time? So, but I did think it's a really interesting discussion. The intention is there.
Teachers have the hardest job in the world. So I completely understand when you look at even getting into these media literacies, you look at the topics that are floating around social media, and you look at our strategy of equity, justice, and belonging, or you're talking about sexuality or whatever it might be. It is so difficult for any human to navigate it. Never mind be responsible for 20 other humans who have 40 maybe parents on the other end with their own opinions on that and what they're being fed. So I get the complexity of it. It's very, very difficult. I'll just say one thing. To make it a priority, it's got to be linked to your strategy. And the way that we have chosen to do so here at the school is not through technology. It's through well-being. And so when you talk about people's well-being in being well and flourishing and happiness and what's important, if this aspect isn't in the conversation, it's not going to work for you strategically.
Excellent. Yeah, John, any final thoughts before we wrap up? I know we're close.
No, I can only echo with Mike as the idea of putting in your strategic plan. And every time you put it in a box of digital literacy or technology, everybody rolls their eyes. You're not going to get a buy-in. That's that office's problem. That's these people's problem. And I really applaud Mike's school for tying it to well-being, because at the end of the day is how much free will do we still want to have? It's down to that. Do we want to have the free will to make our own decisions and pick what we read and what we understand? Or are we going to let somebody else do it for us and actually be kind of intoxicated and don't even realize it? I think these are major, major questions. And as Mike put it, and I think Melanie too, it's, how do you create that in a context of education that's so complex and people have so many things going on? You have different human beings, all with their opinions and their agenda. So I think but I think if you don't make it explicit in your school learning principles, values, and mission, and then also take it away from it being tied to the computer, because a lot of this, you don't need a computer. It's everywhere. You go in this metro, you go to the cinema, you go on an airplane, wherever you're going, in the bus, there's media. It's everywhere. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice of saying it's a tech issue or a digital issue. It's about free will and democracy and free thinking and critical thinking. These are all things that I generally think most schools that we're talking to, it's part of the missions and values that they believe in. So that should be in the front and center.
Fantastic. Wonderfully put. And I think that's a lovely place to end this conversation. It's been, super fascinating. And thank you everyone for sharing your ideas and insights and practical strategies. Such a huge topic. And thank you once again for your time.